Well, good morning, everyone out there. Welcome to the Morning Update Show. I'm your host, Trae Holiday. And as always, you guys know we're going to be giving you guys some great news clips throughout this day. We have an awesome presentation from the Budget Office of Seattle. I am excited to bring them on board, but I got to throw it over to my guy, Big O, to start the show off. Big O, how are you today, man? Happy Tuesday.
First of all, I'm going to have to talk to the people in wardrobe because how you got a mask that just fits you perfect and it's popping and blinging, and then I got what looks like somebody stitched together. But
we are safe today.
I need to talk to your wardrobe people because, you know, I keep coming up on the short end of the stick, man. But today is actually, it's a pretty special show. We have Kara Main-Hester from the Budget Office here. To explain, like it's like budget 101. Yeah. I always like to say I'm smart enough to know what I don't know. And, me personally, I don't understand the whole budget process. And instead of just being ignorant and being like, oh, yeah, I know everything, I think there's probably a lot of other people out there in our community who feel the same way. So we're fortunate enough to have Kara here and to go over a few things. One is like, man, how the city actually collects money, where money goes and everything else. And then also, the mayor talked about yesterday with her plan of budget allocation. So we'll go over some of that. And we've also got Dan Beekman, a writer from the Seattle Times. And guess where Dan went to high school?
Oh, James A. Garfield.
We got another Bulldog in the building. You know what I'm saying, man? For a while, this was like Bulldog TV.
Absolutely, man. Got to give it up to Garfield.
So we got Dan Beekman here. And again, like I said, smart enough to know what I don't know. But Dan Beekman is actually pretty much an expert down there. He hangs down there at City Hall. You know what I'm saying? I don't even think he pays for parking down there anymore. You know what I'm saying? So he's here, and the whole idea is that he's able to ask a lot more questions as well because he's been following the process. Yeah. And the whole point of this is to really be able to give the community an opportunity to learn, along with us. And this is where we really want to be able to use this platform for.
I love that. And honestly, it's one of the reasons when I hear folks out there on the streets and they're just like, man, watch you every day, watch your show every day. You guys are the ones, keeping it grounded, man. You guys are the best source. And honestly, I'm like, wow, that's really a testament to really bringing on folks to speak to both sides of this issue. Like you said, always allowing that platform to really speak to people and give them some information that they've been longing. So I'm excited to hear these answers today myself.
Right. And what we're going to do, I got one more thing to say, and then we're going to take a break. And then we're going to bring Kara Main-Hester on, and she's going to go over a presentation. But one thing I really just want to reach out there to the general public, especially people who follow me on Twitter and on Facebook and everything else, is like, man, I'm going to make a request from you guys. Man, and you might not realize that you're doing this, so I want to make you aware. A lot of you guys are tagging me in these videos of the incident that occurred on the freeway, and you're tagging me in videos of around the murder of Antonio Mays Jr. and everything else. And I'm just letting you know I was there, you know what I'm saying? And these were traumatic experiences for me. And you don't really hear me talk like this or anything else. But, I open a notification and I just see a video of this car and everything else. I have no problem communicating with anybody on Twitter, no matter your belief or no matter how you feel about anything. I'm just asking you, please stop tagging me in these videos. It's not all right. It takes a toll on somebody like me. And also what I will say is this, is oftentimes in Twitter and in the internet, it's very easy to be detached. But you know what? I followed up with all of these people. You know what I'm saying? And we even follow up on the progress of the young man who's still in the hospital. I was with Antonio Mays Jr.'s friends just the other day. They wanted me to walk them through the crime scene, and I did that. I was on the freeway. I've met with Donita Sinclair, Lorenzo Anderson's mother plenty of times and everything else. Our streams are out. We're doing our part. And so I don't need you guys to tag me in videos to remind us of that. And like I said, it really takes a toll on me because I was really there in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely, Omari. Thank you for addressing the public in that way. It's always also, a sense of vulnerability too. That's something you experienced. And just like you said weeks ago, Donita, the mother of Lorenzo, called you to check in on you. So again, it's important that people understand that. Oh, thanks for being, clear about that.
I appreciate it. Like I said, conversation's always welcome. Don't expect people to always agree with me or agree with us. But you know what I'm saying? If you could just not tag me in videos, that would be great. We're going to take a short break right now. We're literally going to get the show on the road. We have Main-Hester from the City of Seattle Budget Office up next, and she's taking us to school. It's Budget 101 right here on the Morning Update Show. All right, welcome back to the Morning Update Show. I'm your host, Omari Salisbury, and this morning we're joined by Main-Hester, PH.D. from the City of Seattle Budget Office. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Omari. That is one of the best introductions I've had in a long time. I appreciate it.
Voila. So I know you're going to go through a presentation here with us, but before we jump into that, maybe you can tell us a little bit about, what you do down in the city and what your job description is.
Yeah. I will spare you the really boring details. So I work in the city budget office, which is it's technically part of the mayor's office in the city. And so my job is to literally sit in between the Seattle Police Department and the mayor's office and central staff. And I point this way because the mayor's office sits above us in City Hall and central staff kind of sits below and beside. And to really understand how the program changes, how the priorities for SPD, how those relate to budget and relate to kind of how the mayor envisions putting our money where our priorities are, right? And someone has to navigate all of that for the mayor and for city council. And so I really am kind of the cog in the middle of that wheel.
So are you like the Congressional Budget Office in a sense that it's like nonpartisan office that just sits there and manages people do analysis?
We do, I do work for the mayor. So I am part of the executive branch. So we're not completely nonpartisan, but we try to be as analytical and kind of grounded in the facts and grounded in the numbers as we can be.
Hey, at least you're dealing in numbers.
numbers are yeah.
Numbers give you some kind of protection, man.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we got a lot lined up for today, so I'll let you jump right into your presentation here.
Mm-hmm.
If you could bring up the first slide, Oya.
Thanks so much. We're going to do a very basic Budget 101 today, so we will head to the next slide because this one is not all that informative. Sorry about that, guys. So to start, let's talk about just some key pieces to the city budget. So first of all, we have a budget process, and that's actually what we've been talking a lot about right now, which is the budget process, how we decide where funding goes. And in 2021, which is the budget process that I'm currently working on, how we take all of the priorities that the community has and make sure that those priorities are funded. The reality is the city has to put forward what we call a balanced budget. So there's a certain amount of money that comes into the city through revenues, and we have to match that up with expenditures. So we can't be like the federal government. We can't spend more than we have. And so that is something that the city has to work on. And it means that we have to make real decisions in the budget office. So we'll talk about revenues, we'll talk about expenditures, and then we'll talk about, frankly, a pretty bleak outlook for 2021 and actually right now for 2020. COVID has really, as you all know, COVID has really impacted businesses and really impacted the revenues coming into the city. So we'll talk about that. And then finally, we'll get into some of the details about SPD's budget, which I think is really interesting to everyone, and it's something I know quite a bit about. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so I would love to tell you that the budget process starts when you all start hearing about it in the news, but the reality is we're working on it all year long. So there is very little downtime, maybe a little bit in January. But so I'm gonna go from left to right on the slide, starting in March. That's when departments actually start preparing their budget. They put together their teams, they think about what is it that we want to fund, what is it we're going to need to cut this year, and they put together those proposals usually between March, April, and May, so kind of second quarter of the year. And then we actually start to review the budget. So in a normal year, we review that budget in June, July, and August. So right now is a really busy time of year where my departments, I have the Seattle Police Department, I also have all the police accountability entities. So that's the Office of Inspector General, the Community Police Commission, those guys. So they all have submitted budgets to me, and then we're reviewing them to see where we should add things and where we should subtract things. And this is a really key time because it really is talking about what are the programs and what are the things that each of those departments are going to do over the next year or two. And this is a time where on the executive side, a lot of our community engagement starts, and then we transmit the budget over to council. We'll do that in September. And then once we do that, then that's when you see a lot of the community meetings happen in council. You see a lot of the news headlines about here's what council's reviewing, here's what they're subtracting, here's what they're adding. But again, all of this has to be balanced. So the mayor submits a balanced budget, and then what happens is council has to add and subtract and also get to a balanced budget. And then finally, council will adopt budget the Monday before Thanksgiving. And let me tell you, it is a rush to the end. And finally, that budget goes into effect in January. So that's the normal process. Let's go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so the city has a $6 billion budget. And while that sounds like a lot of money, a lot of it is actually, we'll talk about how it's all divided up. But to be quite honest, the general fund is what we spend the most of our time talking about. And we'll talk a little bit more about why we talk about the general fund. And then we end up spending, and then our other revenues come from utilities, SPU and City Light. The Seattle Department of Transportation, there's a lot of money, $700 million that comes in through them. And then some other restricted sources. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see that there's a bunch of caveats to those restricted sources. So just because money comes into the city does not mean that it can be spent just any way we want. So utility fees are a great example. When a utility fee comes into the city, we have to actually spend that utility fee on power, light, garbage, sewer. We can't just go and spend it for something else. And there's a lot of laws around how we can spend the different types of money. So even though we have a $6 billion budget, there's a very small amount of the budget that we can use to actually do some of the more discretionary work that we all think about on a daily basis. Because we do usually just assume that our water and power is going to work, but we do have to budget for it every single year, and we can only use it that way. There are some other restrictions. Some interesting ones are the real estate excise tax. So that's the tax that you pay when you sell some sort of real estate. That can only be used to generally build things. So that's very specific. And then a lot of voters remember that we've approved levies for things like the library, for housing, for transportation. Those can only be used in very specific ways. So we can't take that money and go use it for something else, even if that something else is a really good thing to use it for. Does that make sense, Omari?
Yeah, no, I'm following you here
Okay.
because, like I said, it seems like, well, there's lots of streams of revenue in, but the city's hands are tied as far as how they can spend it out. I'll be honest with you, I'd like to get my hands on some of that beverage tax that we, you know what I'm saying? I heard the city collected a pretty penny on the beverage tax, but you're saying that that's in a restriction as well, huh?
It is in a restriction. I mean, did you overpay into the sweetened beverage tax pot?
No, I mean, I was one of the people who just stopped drinking soda, but my son, you know what I'm saying, he double made up for me on it. So he definitely paid into the beverage tax.
I totally understand. And that's one of those restricted pieces of money. So yeah, let's go to what we can actually play with a little bit more, which is our less restricted funding sources. So that's our next slide. So the general fund. You guys have probably heard about the general fund. This is what we talk about. I don't want to say what we fight about, but on some level it is. Because the reality, it's flexible money. So this money can go to housing. This money can go to homelessness. This money can go to all of those community programs that we talk about. But it also goes to police and fire and some of those basic services that we kind of assume that the city funds.
So 1.5 billion makes up the general fund. And so what you're saying is when people are like, okay, we want the city to invest in affordable housing, we want the city to, invest more in fire, or we want, the city to do capital improvements or things like that. That's all out this fund. So, I mean, it really is a fight. You don't have to say that it's like that. This is what everybody's fighting about.
Yeah, I mean, when you're building buildings, there's some other funds that we can do, but when it comes to those services inside of those buildings, that's exactly what we're talking about. So you're right. I don't want to say it's a fight, but it is. It's a limited source of funding.
Yeah, I mean, like 1.5 billion, I think to the average person and myself, this is a lot of money. But for a municipality this big, do you have any context of so our general fund is 1.5 billion. Is there any other cities that you might be able to compare to?
Oh, I didn't pull those numbers ahead of time, so I apologize for you.
My bad.
Nah, that's okay. I stuck really closely here.
But is our general fund? I mean, clearly, if people are fighting over pieces of it, maybe it's not enough. But is this something that can increase, or I guess what are the ways that it would increase to where everybody was like the pie is big enough?
Right. Well, I think we could have a very existential conversation on if the pie is ever big enough. But
right.
There are limits to how much property tax that we can charge, how much sales tax. We don't have an income tax in the state of Washington because the state doesn't allow for it. There is that in other states. So there are things that we can increase, but it's in very small increments, and you can tell that you're getting outside of my area of knowledge.
Oh, yeah.
But there can be changes at the state level, right?
And then the other side, because there's a whole nother side of the issue. There's other people who are like 1.5 is a lot in the general fund. How can you guys reduce spending?
Right. And so it's finding that happy medium between making sure that our tax system doesn't overburden our population so that people or businesses leave, right? and finding that happy medium but then we're providing the services in the city that attracts people here. And it is a very difficult thing to balance. And, we've heard a lot about new revenue streams and things like that. And, right now, our mayor and council are figuring that out. And so it's a very interesting political conversation about how much money is enough. Yeah. So our next slide actually has how it's all divided up. So this is the whole pie. So coming back, this isn't just general fund. This is $6.5 billion, and this is how it's spent. And I will tell you, 54% of that $6.5 billion is to keep the lights on, the sewers flowing, and the streets drivable. So it is just a huge amount of money that goes into what I would consider basic services for all of us and basic infrastructure. And it's frankly not sexy and exciting, but it is. I like power, and I like to be able to turn on the water and have clean water. So there you go. If we go and look at that green slice up at the top, that's where we have neighborhoods. So that's about 5%. That's your Department of Neighborhoods and your Office of Planning and Development. Health and Human Services is a 5% piece of the pie. Arts, Culture, and Recreation, 6%. Public Safety is 12%, so that's police and fire. And then administration, which are some of our finance administrative services, our IT department, HR, human resources, they're 18%. So they have a big chunk of the pie, but it's a lot of kind of randomly small back-of-house things.
Right. And a quick question, Arts, Culture, and Recreation, is that where the Parks Department? I see Recreation.
Yeah.
So they're in that slice right there. And what are some of the services, not too deep on it, but Health and Human Services for the 5%? What are some of the things that they're providing?
Yeah, so that's going to be your Human Services Department mainly. And so they are providing a lot of your services for unsheltered individuals. They are providing a lot of your youth education programs. I'm sure I'm forgetting giant slices, but they are any of your services where the city is going into the community and actually providing a program. Especially homelessness programs is our biggest expansion. That is where they're housed.
Okay,
Yep.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, can we jump to the next slide? The next slide is actually the general fund. So again, this is that $1.5 billion of what is a little bit more discretionary funding. And so this is half of the general fund is for public safety. So Seattle Police Department and Seattle Fire Department. 19% is that administration. We've pretty much talked about the rest. You can see how they're all separated out. Any questions on that one? It's just kind of a different view of what we already talked about before.
So out of the general fund, and clearly public safety takes up 50%.
It does.
$750 million in public safety. I think when people hear public safety, though, we know police. What are other categories fit into public safety?
It's police and fire. So Seattle Fire Department is the other big one. So $400 million for Seattle Police Department and about $300 for Fire Department. And frankly, not a whole lot else there. They're two really huge departments.
Yeah, and the topic, well, not so much fire right now, but the police is definitely the topic of discussion. No matter where you land on this issue, everybody's like, hey, and actually your visit here today is very timely to actually what's occurring in the city. Sometimes they say in this business, better be lucky than good. You know what I'm saying? So we happen to have you here one day after all of these.
Does that mean that I'm the lucky one to be assigned to Seattle Police Department? Maybe not good. I'm okay with that, by the way.
But it's good to be able to have someone who's an expert in that, and I think that the general public, sometimes press conferences and speeches and things like that. It's just one thing, but to be able to talk to people who actually review numbers and things like that is important, and be able to break things down. Is this your last slide for 101?
I think we actually have one more slide for the budget side of 101. And so if we want to go to that next slide. So I know
red.
There's a lot of numbers here, and there's a lot of red, and that's on purpose. So we talked a lot about revenues. We said the city has a $6.5 billion budget. And then COVID hit. And I will tell you, COVID has really affected the city's revenues. The Parks Department can't have this is a minor thing and it's kind of laughable, but they can't have a snack bar open. That means that snack bar isn't making any money, which isn't paying for the person who normally works at the snack bar. And so that is just we have thousands of those situations across the city and that revenue is not coming in. In addition, our businesses are not open. And so our normal business and occupation taxes are not actually coming in. Our sales tax has decreased dramatically. And so we've seen over $200 million decrease in our city revenues in 2020. So right now at council, if you remember at the very beginning, we talked about usually I'm planning right now. I haven't submitted anything. We haven't submitted anything to council normally. But this year, because of the pandemic, we actually had to go back to council to rebalance the budget. And that's what we're talking about right now is how do we fill the $200 million gap? I'm not going to go into that. That is a pretty that is a graph that my friend Kelsey, who's sitting behind us, told us that we should not talk about. But let's just say it's a huge gap. Thankfully, there is some federal funding that is coming in to help fill that gap. But we also had a huge amount of expenses for all those COVID testing sites and all those other things that we've done. So that is how we will pivot after this and talk a little bit about SPD. But the reductions you guys have heard that SPD has already taken, or that we talked about a couple weeks ago that SPD took and the rest of the city took, is really about trying to fill this gap.
Right. So on this graph right here, and we're going to take a break here in a second, then we're going to come back to the SPD slides, and Dan's going to pop up. But on this 212,500,000, when we hear in the news that the mayor has cut 20 million from the police budget, that's you guys trying to balance this 212 across that pie chart that you showed us.
Yeah, that was the first step we took was to do exactly that. And then actually, as the mayor was hearing discussions about how we should be transforming SPD, we did take a very quick look to see, is there anything else that we should stop doing right now? And we actually went from $16 million to $20 million because we made that analysis and made some decisions right then.
Right. And so the initial, and not jumping too far ahead in our conversation today, but the initial cut to SPD, it was like 5%, right? What percentage, you don't have to go through every department, but was that an average cut across the different agencies of the city, of those different areas of the pie chart?
I don't have the exact number, but I know SPD was on the higher end of the cuts, maybe one of the highest percentages, because they did have they did have some more overtime, for instance, that it was easier for us to kind of grab and put back into the pot. So they were on the higher end, but in general, every single department in the city has had to make some sort of cut.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. So we're going to take a short break right now, and then when we come back, we're going to Kara's going to get into the SPD slides and go over some of the stuff that we heard yesterday as far as the different cuts that are out there and everything else. You are watching the Morning Update Show. Good foot. Welcome back to the Morning Update Show. I'm your host, Omari Salisbury. And man, you know, I love the production team here. They're always so creative. Today I've been 3 different positions, which is good. Right over here, we have Main-Hester from the Seattle Budget Office. And right over here, we have Dan Beekman, staff writer for the Seattle Times. And what we're doing right now is that we went through Budget 101. Thank you. It's very informative and broke everything down. And we wanted to do that to preface the next set of slides, which is the police budget and some of the stuff that we heard out of City Hall. And then after that, Dan actually has some questions that he'll be posing to you. But we'll continue with your presentation now, going into the SPD slides, if you want to bring those up. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about SPD. So SPD has a $400 million budget. This is honestly, SPD's budget is vastly personnel. It's people. It is sworn officers. So those are the officers we think about who are carrying badges, who are in patrol cars, who are investigating, things like that. And then we have about 7% of SPD's budget has to do with overtime. So that is about $30 million a year in overtime. And then we have this big yellow chunk, which is interfund charges. And this is not a particularly interesting thing, but it's always good for folks to know that the city actually has a lot of those administrative departments that I mentioned: FAS, Finance and Administrative Services, IT, Human Resources, that all actually bill back the departments. So they actually send a bill to SPD every month and say, this is how much you owe us, and then SPD has to pay that. And they actually don't get any reductions off their bill. They don't get any choice off their bill. We just tell them how much they pay, and they pay it, which sometimes isn't super exciting for the departments. And then what is left in SPD after you look at personnel, after you look at overtime, and after you look at interfund charges is a teeny tiny 4%. And that 4% is actually purchasing things, so purchasing equipment, purchasing office supplies, professional services, which are their contracts, and most of their contracts have to do with, the biggest contract they have has to do with red light cameras, so which generates a lot of revenue. We talked about how important revenue is. Teeny amount of travel and training, and then we have kind of other accounts, which are random things. So those last 4 things, while we like to talk a lot about how we can cut equipment and how we can cut, pens and pencils and staplers, there's just not a lot of money there. Most of SPD's budget is in personnel. So any questions, Dan? It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, and thanks to the crew for having me on today. Why don't you move ahead, and then I'll follow up after that sort of basic pie chart.
Perfect. Okay, so our next slide is, this didn't come out as well here, so apologies for that. SPD actually is divided in what they call bureaus. And so the bureaus are things like patrol, chief of police, criminal investigations, professional standards, collaborative policing. So in each of those bureaus has a specific number of units underneath it, and each of those units have a specific amount of budget. There are 55 units-ish in SPD, which makes putting them all on a single chart a miserable thing for me to try to do, and I gave up. So that's why you got bureaus. So by far, in this bar chart, the big one in the middle is patrol. And patrol is about $144 million of the SPD's $400 million budget. So they are well over 25% of the SPD budget. And so they're kind of an easy thing to point to and say, hey, what can we do here? Should something change here, right? And so we've just generally in the budget office, every year we're thinking about what should change, what should stay, what should go, and working with SPD on that. And so we have lots of conversations generally about each of these bureaus. So,
yeah, well, one thing I was going to ask, and that might be helpful for folks, is when you're building the next year's budget, whether it's for SPD or for a different department, do you start from zero and look at, okay, we're starting from zero, we have this much money, we want to get these outcomes, where are we going to split it up this year? Or do you build off of, well, what did we do last year, and are we making incremental changes to that up or down? Which one?
Great. The city does incremental budgeting. So we do changes up and down. We don't do what they call base budgeting. So we don't start from zero and add everything in. Instead, we say, this is where we started. This is where we ended at the end of 2020. So that's going to be our starting point for 2021. What do we want to add and what do we want to subtract?
Got it. And then, one thing that jumped out at me when I was looking at this chart is, like you said, that huge amount of money that goes to patrol as opposed to the other bureaus. And, why does so much go to the patrol? What is the thinking behind that? The city council, like you were talking about before, has been talking with SPD and with the budget office about digging into this budget. And there have been some interesting, statistics about most 911 calls that the police department responds to are non-criminal, and a very small amount of them are violent crime. Only 3% of the time when the police go out do they make an arrest right away on a call, I think I saw. So people might think, why not spend more on the criminal investigations, which is one of the other bars, as opposed to the patrol?
Right. It's an excellent question. I think, so first of all, 50% of the whole police department sworn staff is in patrol. And that is because, so SPD divides their 911 calls by a variety of priorities. Priority 1 are the most violent crimes, right? And there is an expectation, there's a national standard with regards to how long it should take for a person to get a response to a violent crime call. It's, don't quote me on it, it's around 6 minutes, plus or minus some seconds. I'm sure my friends at SPD will correct me on that. But we don't know when crime will happen. We don't know what time of day it will happen. And so you always have to staff patrol across this whole large city based on how long it takes to get to a place. And on top of that, you also have to staff patrol based on the topography of our city. Our city is not particularly easy to go cross town at 5 o'clock, most of the time in non-COVID times, let me be clear. So we have to staff in such a way that we can get that officer there within that 6-minute time frame. And there is the question, I agree, with regards to violent crimes and can we have response by people other than sworn officers? And it's a great analysis to do, and it's an important analysis to do. It's not one that's been completed, and it's going to take some time, because one of the things that the folks that I've worked with SPD on have noted that some of these calls come in as non-criminal, non-violent, and they are very violent calls. And so we have to be, they're being very thoughtful in saying, this is something that we think it would be better. The chief has even said, it would be better to maybe have a different type of response, but we need to work through that. And so patrol is a good place to look, but patrol is a great place to look, and we want to maintain those service times, because when people call 911, they expect someone to call for that awful violent crime, right? And so there is a balancing act here. And then our investigation units and our specialty units and things, those also have a purpose, but again, those are other functions that maybe we should look at and make sure they're right-sized. So really looking at what does our community expect our police department to do? What do they expect officers to do? And what would they rather have a non-officer do? And that really will drive budget.
Another thing that jumped out to me on the chart was, I don't know if folks can see it, but I think it's the second bar. I think it was for the chief operating officer's office.
Yeah.
And it's what is that?
It's
many millions of dollars,
yes.
$35 million,
Like $36 million.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
$36 million. The way it's labeled at least sounds like one person. Why so much money for just the chief operating officer of one department in the city?
Yeah, and I can fully check, but if memory serves, that's where we actually budget for 911 dispatch. So this is where sometimes the bureau title and what the units are within it don't make a lot of sense. And so this is a great example of one. Another one that I've poked at a little bit in the past has to do with HR. Why do we need so many people in HR? Well, it's where our police recruits and students often we budget for them there. So this is somewhere where you have some complexities with the budget that, you just have to look under the hood a bit. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we were talking a little bit about those 2020 budget reductions that were taken. Omari and I were talking about them. And this is the $20.4 million that SPD took in reductions. And the first thing that they did, and the first thing that we frankly did across the whole city during COVID, as we realized that revenues were going down, is we instituted a hiring freeze. There is a waiver process for those really important positions, such as like 911 dispatchers. We did hire additional 911 dispatchers because we had a variety of vacancies. But in general, there was a hiring freeze in SPD. We reduced the overtime. Obviously, a lot of the big events that we had previously SPD had previously worked overtime didn't happen. And frankly, we couldn't afford our emphasis patrol budget anymore. So that also was reduced immediately. Travel and training, any new equipment, we shut all of that down. Anything that we had control over, we had to stop spending money. And that's what SPD committed to. And then I mentioned that we found another $4 million that we stopped doing, and that was to delay some early facility work on the north precinct and kind of what the best response is for the north end of the city.
And so you were saying before, telling Omari that most of this, top 16 million, was identified in response to what was going on with COVID and the economy, the less tax revenue coming in than expected, and it was just that bottom 4 million that was sort of tied on as the protests were ramping up and that kind of thing?
Yeah, we adjusted those priorities right away. Yep.
And now, I guess, just for people who haven't been following closely, you were talking a little bit about it, but now the City Council has received this proposal as part of the general rebalancing package from the mayor for the remainder of 2020, and is working through how the council members might change that, and they might, they're talking about making much deeper cuts than this to the police department budget. Do you, as someone in the mayor's budget office, how do you interact with that process right now?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. This is not a typical thing that we usually do, but yeah, that's a great description. So my interaction right now is council is often thinking of new ideas. They have questions. They kind of want to look under the hood of, when you said hiring freeze, how many people was that? Who was that? And so they're asking those questions. And we have I have a central staffer who I work with who works for council. And he provides me with questions that I then provide to the department, or I answer myself. And then we send those answers to those questions back. And coming pretty soon, probably tomorrow, council will have very specific changes that they want to make. It's called an issue identification. And then I will work with my central staff, with the central staff analyst, to figure out how much those things cost, what impacts they have, how it will affect performance metrics in the Seattle Police Department, and things like that.
Right, and really, the mayor makes a proposal on budgeting, whether it's for the remainder of this year or for next year. Then the council basically gets to take and leave what it wants out of that proposal and pass something, and generally gets the final say, unless the mayor wants to veto the council's proposal, and then the council, with 6 out of 9 votes, could override that veto. But generally, it's the mayor proposes, the council changes and passes, right?
Generally, yes.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, let's head to the next slide. Okay. So I want to pivot away from where we're at right now in the SPD process or in the 2020 process, which is not something we're normally talking about this time of year, and remind everyone that normally we'd be talking about the 2021 budget. And just a little bit of a preview, we know that we're going to have a revenue shortfall of $293 million. So we had $220 million revenue shortfall for 2020, but 2021 is looking even more bleak. So we are at the point where we're looking at the 2021 budget. So we are in July, and just in case anyone forgot, and we are looking at reviewing and finalizing that 2021 budget for the executive and transmitting down to council. So let's talk about some early announcements that the mayor has made with regards to 2021 and SPD's budget. So if we want to go to the next slide. Okay, so on the left here, what I have is the SPD 2020 budget, which was $409 million. And then we took that $20 million reduction, we call that rebalancing. And so it went down to $393 million. So there's some rounding here that I'm realizing we probably didn't figure in. And so then what we do is, like I said, we get to the end of 2020, theoretically, and then swap to and then use that as our baseline or beginning for 2021. You will notice that between 2020 adopted and the 2021 baseline, we went up from $409 million to $426 million. How did that happen? We actually had the cost of living increases for a variety of our unions were agreed to at the end of 2019, which affects 2021. So that's why you see that big jump due to some agreements in our collective bargaining agreements. So, and that wasn't actually SPOG, which we're talking a lot with regards to Seattle Police Department. It was actually nearly everyone else. So when we get to 2021, we've already proposed some reductions, and our reductions are a $76 million decrease in the 2021 budget for SPD. So if we want to swap to the next slide, we can actually show the listing. And I'll let Dan, did you want to jump in on anything, or want to jump into this?
Why don't you go over this, and then I
Yeah.
probably have some questions on it.
Absolutely. Okay, so for 2021, we haven't actually, so the mayor made some very early announcements yesterday, and this isn't typical, but it was definitely something that we wanted to do to say, hey, we've thought about quite a few things already. And so the first thing that we looked at was not expanding the police force. So that will actually save a pretty significant amount of money, $13.7 million, if we don't expand the Seattle Police Department. We're also looking at not filling civilian vacancies. So this is just carrying forward the same thing that we had been doing in 2020. We can then reduce overtime, we've proposed that. And then we proposed a variety of transfers of a variety of units from SPD out of SPD control, either to other departments that maybe make as much sense as SPD, or as independent units. And we're still working through all the details on that, but they were the 911 call center, parking enforcement. Funny fact, my husband has said, I don't know how many times, I didn't know SPD did parking enforcement. And I thought to myself, I wonder how many other people think that. Our Office of Emergency Management, which we've seen a lot and has been really busy with COVID work, they are actually, it's suggested they may transfer to another department or become an independent group, which they often are in other cities. And our Office of Police Accountability has always been independent, but interestingly within SPD. So this would just kind of formalize their independence as their own office, very similar to the Community Police Commission.
Right, and so, taken together, the transferring of the 911 call and dispatch center, the parking enforcement unit, the Office of Emergency Management, the Office of Police Accountability, those are all sort of taking functions and people, employees that are in the police department budget right now, and moving them out. Mm-hmm. But, a lot of what's some of the protesters, Black Lives Matter protesters and advocates have been talking about is wanting to defund the police by a certain amount, and talk about taking money from the police department and moving it to other needs or other programs or other ways to respond to 911 calls, other community issues. And with that, I think it added up to something like more than $50 million of the transfers. That's not doing that per se. It's just saying the parking enforcement officers, they're going to keep doing exactly what they're doing. They're probably going to be paid a similar amount of money, although there could be some complications there, but they're just not going to go on the books in the police department budget, and their boss isn't going to be the chief of police. Is that sort of an accurate way of putting it?
To some extent. I mean, I think what the mayor and many of us are envisioning is as we make those transfers, it's actually an excellent time to have the community conversation about what does this look like? should there be changes in parking enforcement? Should there be changes in the 911 call center? And related back to that, how police officers are deployed, they are deployed by the dispatchers on some level in the 911 center. And so as we start looking at how do we better deploy the right people for the task, the 911 call center is integral to that community conversation. And so while we're saying these are just very initial things that we've said, this deserves more conversation, but there's a good answer, a good step one. We're saying this is the good step one, but I actually am really looking forward to the community conversation, which is what does this look like into 2021? And how we get there is, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done between now and the end of the year, let me be very clear. But I think that's the important community conversation.
Right. I mean, I think that, a lot of people would hear, okay, moving the call center, moving the parking enforcement out of SPD, that's an interesting change. But also, folks who have been talking about police brutality and discriminatory policing, they want to know, well, how are those changes going to affect my life on the ground? Mm-hmm. Is it going to change my life at all, or how the police interact with me? And generally, those departments already are staffed by civilians, not mm-hmm. by sworn police officers, correct?
Right, exactly. And so this is where, remember, towards the beginning, I said there's 55 units within the Seattle Police Department. This is only a couple, right? And I say that because really, we need to all, as a community, take time to dig into what are those functions, what are those units, and how can we affect the change. I've been in meetings where the chief has said she's ready to transform SPD, and that's a really exciting thing to hear the chief say. But it can't happen just based on a budget process. I'm one analyst. I am the one analyst in the city budget office for SPD, and this is really amazing work around policy and even state laws sometimes and municipal code. And so combining all those things together, I think just let's call this phase one. We're calling this the initial phase because I think we all believe and we all agree there's a lot more work to do to meet the community and really have the community lead this work.
Right, and one of the interesting things that's going on right now is, the mayor is talking about sort of this is phase one. Some city council members are ready to go, well, rather than only transferring out some of these civilian employees, let's start potentially, although they haven't put forward specific proposals yet, that might come tomorrow, you said.
Maybe.
Let's start actually reducing the size of the force
mm-hmm.
Of sworn police officers as a way to respond to some of this stuff and transferring some of those duties right away, if possible. And so that seems like what some of the conversation and some of the conflict right now between the mayor and the city council.
Yeah, it definitely is. I'm hearing the same things. We'll find out more tomorrow, I think. And I think it's, one of the things that I keep looking to is that if there are situations where we have to lay off officers, we are likely to have to lay off first those new recruits and those new student officers. And I've met some of those recruits and some of those new student officers, and they have come to this job because they want to help their community. And it just hurts me a little bit in my soul that we've worked so hard to get more representative new recruits that could be laid off. And so that's the thing that we're all trying to navigate, of course.
Sure, and actually that's something that came up yesterday and has come up. The police chief, Carmen Best, wrote a letter last Friday that mentioned that as something that she was worried about if there were deeper cuts to the police department. But there's been some back and forth on that. When you're talking about newer recruits or newer officers having to be laid off first, that's a reference, I think, to the police union rules. Mm-hmm. Or that's in the contract that says if there are layoffs, the officers that came in last are the first out. Mm-hmm. One of the city council members, and I don't know if you can speak to this, yesterday, Lisa Herbold mentioned that she said there's a rule in the public Safety Service Commission, which is a little known body that deals with these kind of issues in the city, that says actually the chief and the city can potentially lay people off out of order, so not by seniority, if it's deemed that that's necessary for an efficient operation of the department. Can you speak to whether that's the case and how that might apply?
I am assuming there's some city attorneys that spent some very late hours last night thinking about that. I am not a city attorney, so I'm going to leave that to them because, I mean, to your point, the Public Safety Civil Service Commission is a teeny tiny body in the city, literally 2 employees, and they, they're not someone that we look to their rules very often. So. Anyways, it's an interesting thing.
I know some readers have asked me, why can't the police department lay off the officers that have community complaints against them first? That's something that might be discussed, but I'm not sure exactly yet how that would apply.
Yeah. Attorneys and contracts and all sorts of fun places that are well outside of my area of expertise. So, perfect. So do we have, I think we may have another slide, but maybe not. I think that was my last slide. Perfect. So. I think so.
We have a marathon session out here, man.
I know.
God bless you. We're almost done out here. Did you have another question before we break?
I got lots of questions, but you got to get on with your show, so I'm gonna let you guys.
We got the show. We're gonna take a thank you, Dan Beekman from the Seattle Times for joining in. You know what I'm saying, in this conversation, and something that we kind of pride ourselves with here on Converge. We're a media company, but there's so many other media professionals, especially right over there at Seattle Times, and want to be able to give you an opportunity to come in here and bring some of that knowledge you bring from City Hall, because I know you hang out there a lot. We're going to take a short break right now. We're going to keep it short. We're over time, but we did have some community questions for Kara, so we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. You're watching the Morning Update Show. All right, welcome back to the Morning Update Show. It's the three amigos here. We got a new friend. Huh?
Hello.
Kara Main-Hester from the City of Seattle Budget Office. You know what I'm saying? Thanks for hanging with, like I said, marathon session over here.
I know.
Your Budget 101, the SPD Budget Overview, Dan Beekman's questions. And now my co-host, Trae Holiday, has joined us back on set. and we're going through some of the questions that the community had.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this, honestly. So thank you so much for taking time for some community questions. So the first question is, what other departmental budgets are being analyzed by your team or others in regards to community funding?
Oh, that's really interesting. So, I mean, truly, we analyze every budget for to look at community funding, and we're actually doing a much deeper dive this year on race and social justice to make sure, especially with regards to cuts, that we are not cutting budgets. I mean, because unfortunately, that's what we're doing a lot of this year, right? Is we're cutting budgets, and to make sure that we are making as equitable a choice as possible. So we're not cutting programs that would more greatly affect people, BIPOC people. And so we are doing that literally every single time we talk about budgets. We are opening or closing with that discussion. And everything from the Office of Civil Rights all the way to the Human Services Department to the Seattle Police Department.
That's a great answer. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
And then I'm going to ask one more. I'll hop it over to, I know O has some questions for community too. Jim from the community said, has the city ever had an outside nonpartisan group examine staffing, workload, salaries, and other expenditures?
I'm going to assume that was maybe specific to SPD or to everything.
It looks like to everything.
Oh, interesting. I do know that I'm sure we have. I know that we do a financial statement every year, and we have audited financials, and those are all obviously non-partisan groups. But probably, I don't know if we've done anything specifically unique outside of what is required by code.
Do you think right now, with everything that's going on around SPD, that like an outside, nonpartisan, third party, whatever company or agency to look at everything that's going on, would that be in order? I mean, if nothing more for the citizens to feel like, hey, you know what, somebody outside of this
Yeah, well,
has looked at everything.
Yeah, of course. And I think generally we believe in transparency, and we open those books, and we believe in public disclosure. And so, sure, of course, all of those things cost money, and my budget director, I can literally hear him in the back of my head. But also, like, the Seattle Police Department has been under the consent decree, and we do have an independent third-party monitor who looks over many of our programs. So, but yeah, having a second and a third and a fourth look is always good and makes us all better all the time. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another one from the community. Martha asked, is the general fund where the SPD overtime comes from?
Yes. So the overtime is within SPD's budget, and all of SPD's budget is paid from the general fund.
Right. So another question here. This will probably be an easy one for you. It's yes or no, or it can happen. But they're asking, is this PowerPoint available on the city website?
Oh, it isn't yet, because, as you know, I was working on it late last night. But we can probably make that happen. I'll ask my friend Kelsey how to do that.
All right, so Kelsey, work over.
We all look to the corner where Kelsey.
I don't know if you can answer this, but this is a question we actually get a lot here. And it says, what are the estimated property damages from, well, actually, this might be something you can answer. I don't think that, well, the question is, what are the property damages around, CHOP, as far as the damages the city's paying for and everything else? If you can answer that, great. But in the bigger question, I think that you guys released a number as far as what the actual protests have cost the city.
Yeah, so I can't speak to the property damage number, and there's a long story as to why, but none of that lives in the Seattle Police Department's budget. But what does is there was a question with regards to how much the protests had cost to SPD, because mostly SPD overtime. There were some materials, but it was fairly minor, and it was in about the $6.5 million range for the first overtime information that we received. So $6.5 million at least.
Does that include man hours and woman hours? And but does that also include like munitions, tear gas, you know what I'm saying? I don't know, pulling in other officers from other cities, flashbangs,
Yeah.
stuff.
Stuff. I know, stuff. We did.
And I know some of that stuff personally, but
Yeah. We did count it all up. I don't have the number off the top of my head. It was, so the $6.5 million is literally just the personnel overtime. All the stuff, I can't remember off the top of my head how much that was. And then other jurisdictions did help. Often they help on mutual aid, and they don't, that forces help each other, just like.
So like Bellevue might help Seattle and Seattle might help Bellevue.
Exactly. And so there isn't necessarily a bill that's sent in the mail. It's more, hey, can you help us next time? And that's how good law enforcement and how good fire departments work. And there was a National Guard call out, and I don't know if we've received a bill on it, but I do know that we had to pay for like meals and transport.
Don't worry, Jay gonna be sending a bill.
I suspect we will be getting a bill if we have not already gotten it.
We'll figure that out.
Yeah.
I got
Did you
one
have
more.
one more?
Yeah, one more from Shelly out there. Thanks you guys for sending your questions in to the Facebook chat. Shelly out there asks, utility fees go to power, light, and etc., but utility taxes go to the general fund. Is that true?
Ooh, that's not necessarily a question I know a whole lot about. So I will apologize, but we can get you that answer.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
of
Thank
course.
you.
We'll follow up there. And just to wrap it up here on the question and answer, and because clearly defund is the word of the day or the month that's been going on here. And if it wasn't really defund, I would like to say that we would have you on the show talking about, because we like to inform people, but the sense of urgency around it is really what people have been talking about in defunding the Seattle Police Department. And our understanding, and Dan asked this question, I just want to ask it again, kind of in a different way before we get out of here, is our understanding of what protesters and people like Decriminalize Seattle and things like that is on the defund, is that dollars from the Seattle Police Department are taken and moved into the community, right? And that's you agree that's kind of what you hear, right?
Absolutely.
Is that if the Seattle Police Department had $1 million, you're now taking $500,000 and putting it in a community program, is what our understanding of defund is. The mayor yesterday, previously it was 20 million. That was like the cut for everybody coming through. How can you reduce the budget? And then was it 56 million yesterday?
It was another 76 million.
So 76 million. And so what happened yesterday, just for clarity of everybody, this is an important issue. And so we have an expert here. We want to be clear, is that the mayor didn't propose the $76 million go from the Seattle Police Department into this defund model. What the mayor proposed was that $76 million worth of people and services and bureaus are moved out of the Seattle Police Department.
Yes. So, and you were right originally with your 56 million. 56 million is moved out of the police department. I'm hoping my numbers are correct. And the balance is literally cut from the police department's budget. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, we've just said cut. We haven't decided what is done. As you guys know, we have this huge revenue gap, so we have to cut regardless on some level. But I do know that the mayor has committed $100 million to the community and the BIPOC community. And so, but those two things aren't necessarily linked, and we're still figuring that out.
It's good to hear you say that, because we say that on this show all the time, that it's two different conversations.
Yeah.
Whatever the mayor's promising with her $100 million and the $5 million and everything else, and this particular issue over here. And like I said, this is a big week. When is the council meets tomorrow?
Council meets tomorrow.
On this, and what would be the outcome of that vote?
So council meets tomorrow on 2020. So, I mean, that's what's so funny, is we're meeting on 2020. And so the outcome of that is my understanding is we will understand what the council proposes to change in the budget for 2020. So that's the budget we're living with right now, is what will happen tomorrow.
All right. I mean, and so these are all important things, guys. We're trying to do our part here You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Is to be able to bring the information and information source. Wrote a blog post yesterday that kind of said that, you know, what if we're talking about reimagining this city, no matter which route you're going, whether you're reimagining through King County Equity Now, or you're reimagining on Mayor Durkin's plan, or you know, hey, Chief Best's plan, or plans we haven't heard of, is that it's up. This is a city thing. This isn't the Central District. This isn't the South End. This isn't Capitol Hill. That all the citizens of our city need to be engaged. It was Magnolia, whether it's Greenwood, whether, you know, Lake City and everything else.
That's right.
You know, it's
It's a citywide plan.
yeah, and this is a big deal. This is a big week here, and so I hope that we've explained, you know, and thank you, Kara, for budget 101. Also, we've been able to explain the SPD expenditures. We've also been able to ask some questions, and we've also been able to clarify that, you know, whether the 56 million is a transfer out and not necessarily a defund, you know, which is, I mean, people should know exactly what's going on. Kara, we're getting ready to get out of here. When we get out of here, we always stand up.
Yes.
Why don't you stand up with us? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
You did an awesome job.
I appreciate it. Thank you for being easy on me.
Well, the community needed to be informed, so we appreciate bringing you on and you coming on to give some information. So thanks.
It was absolutely my pleasure.
Definitely. So we'll catch you guys. We'll be back live again today, but for the morning update show, we'll catch you guys tomorrow, 11 a.m. Until then, peace.
Peace.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought. Facing the rising sun of a new day.